Well, hello there, and welcome back to the very latest episode of my Love Machine podcast. Now, when it comes to relationships, one of the biggest problems is conflict, which can be solved by effective communication. So, handily enough, today's topic is called effective communication to resolve conflict in relationships. Now, I have to say that conflict is a big part of every relationship, whether you like it or not, because as much as you love each other, you'll sometimes find yourself at odds, no matter how much you are on good terms. Whether it's about how to raise your children, how to pay the mortgage, or how many cushions you might need to get on the sofa that week. So today, I'll be discussing strategies for resolving and preventing arguments so you can weather the rocky times and enjoy more harmony together. So today, I am very privileged to be joined by the wonderful transformational coach, Stefi Daskalopoulou. Now, Stefi, how are you doing?
Hello, James. I'm good. Thank you. Just very hot here, but I'm managing all right.
It is roasting today. I'm absolutely sweating. So let me just explain to everyone who you are, and then you can explain to everyone yourself in more detail, if that's okay. So what I've got here, Stefi is a transformational coach, like I mentioned, and she uses transformational tools such as neurolinguistic programming to help people rewire their subconscious minds by finding the root cause of the programs that are in the loop subconsciously and which stop them from making the changes that they want in their lives to create the reality that they truly want and deserve. Is that about right?
This is better than I could have said it.
Wonderful. That's really good. Well, always good to get an introduction right on
Thanks.
here. So I know we spoke off podcast the other day, had a great chat on there, but can you tell my listeners about your journey so far, who you are and what brought you to being a transformational coach?
Sure. I mean, it actually all started with myself going through some more challenging situations that I felt maybe it was harder for me to manage, or maybe I felt like I didn't have the tools. I didn't know how to improve my life and my situation. So that got me to really study and search for in the fields of psychology. I also studied business psychology as my master's degree because I felt always kind of attracted to helping improving people's lives in a way. So I started from the more corporate world. And as I carried on there, I felt a more of a pull to take this into more personal matters. And as I said, also at the same time, transforming my life and my situation. And I felt that there are so many things we believe they just have to be in a certain way because of our programming and our conditioning. And then I realized, well, it doesn't have to be like that. We don't have to be controlled by our patterns. It's just defense mechanisms we have learned during our childhood most of the time. And if we really, are open to look at the situations in our lives in a more maybe in a way that we can see what they have to teach us, we can learn a lot about ourselves. So this is what took me down this road, and I think everything in my life was just a little adding piece to that, and it was just forming the bigger picture of then ending up doing coaching and helping others to experience the transformations that I myself had experienced, and found these tools so helpful for myself and for others. So yeah.
Amazing. So what sort of people do you work with?
I work with many different kinds of people, so it really depends. I also have this very personal approach to each person individually, that I will, look at every person uniquely to see what their needs are and what they and where I will meet them where they're at. So I do have this more broad clientele, let's say.
Mhm.
But I do usually work with people who either want to improve their relationships, or that they feel stuck in, if they want to achieve something and they feel somehow this is blocked for them. And then we work with the limiting beliefs and the patterns that are stopping them from doing that. Or in general, the people that I work with, as a general rule, they end up connecting more with themselves, like in a more authentic way. So
Mhm.
all of these blocks that we have that stop us in, doing the things that we truly want to do usually are covering our natural expression. So the more you explore, the more you increase your self-awareness and you work with yourself, the more naturally you express yourself, I have find. So the aim for all of my sessions is to help someone to connect to their natural expression, and then this gets seen through what they want to achieve in the world, through what they want their relationships to look like. So, because it's different when you're doing something just because society is telling you to, or you feel you have to be in a certain way because that's what other people are doing. But what do you really want to do as a person? So we align, the goals with the person's natural essence in a way.
Fantastic. That sounds really, really interesting. I think that neurolinguistic programming is a great way of doing that as one of the tools that you use. So can you explain to my listeners exactly what that is and any sort of tips they can use right now to improve themselves?
Yes, sure. So neurolinguistic programming is basically a tool that it has a lot of aspects to it. So there are different exercises and practices for it, but the essential core point of it is to help a person work with the perception that they have over the situations in their lives. So, for example, if something is bothering me, it doesn't mean that something is bad. It means that I'm telling a story to myself as to why this is bothering me. So it helps someone work a lot with those stories that they tell themselves, and these stories are what is creating their experiences. So it's a very helpful tool to also find the root causes of why we say these stories, and to basically if we say all these patterns and limiting beliefs that we have are some sort of programming that we have in our subconscious, NLP is a great tool to help us to rewire this programming and unpack its its elements, the elements of this programming, and then shift it as well so that we have a new experience.
I think it's an incredibly useful thing to do. I do an element of it with my coaching myself. Not a huge amount like I used to, but I do quite a bit. And there's different things I can use to build confidence. And like you said, to get rid of limiting beliefs and to create new visions as well, ways they see themselves and other people see them. And this sort of ties me in nicely to the topic of the conversation today, which is about conflicts in relationships. Because often we're telling ourselves stories in our heads that our partners are thinking, and it's not true at all. It's just our version of reality is different to theirs. That's something that I see quite a lot. What are the sort of conflicts that you see in relationships?
Well, usually when we have a conflict in general, it's a matter of two parties of the conflict not having their needs met. So therefore that's the reason why there is a conflict. And the most common that I see is people not feeling understood by their partner, which again has to do with their need not being met in the relationship. And this is a more general rule, because the not being understood can show up in many different ways, where we might get defensive or bring other elements to the argument. But I would say this is the most common one. Or maybe the person has a very certain idea in their minds as to how things should be, and then the other person seems to have a different idea, and then this is where there's also a clash or a conflict of two different needs or two different perspectives.
Yeah, I think quite often you mentioned about not having their needs met. A lot of that is they think the partner's not listening to them, as in not paying attention to what they want or what they're saying. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely very common as well. But I would also say that in relation to the person who feels not being heard, usually there is a lot to unpack there for that person as well, as to why they feel like that. And maybe this is a pattern that they carry, from their past of not being heard. So then they're just replaying this through the other.
They are. And that's why I think it's really important that they do work on this and resolve I mentioned at the start that conflicts are a normal part of developing, aren't they, and growing a relationship. They're not always a bad thing. I think some degree of conflict can help you grow. It can help be the process that you can both be stronger together if you know what you're doing and how to handle it. Because quite often conflicts can escalate into full-blown arguments, and then someone's sulking and doesn't want to talk, and they even fight sometimes. This is what happens. But do you think that it can be used to grow a relationship as well, these things?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as you said, of course, depending on the openness that each person has to see it that way,
Yeah.
it can be easier to address it from that perspective. But
Yeah.
I would say, even in the examples that you mentioned of, let's say, when an argument really escalates and it goes quite far, even this can really, like, upon reflection, can be a very insightful experience to see, you know, what happened, what played out in that argument. Because the reason why an argument will escalate to, like, the, you know, extreme points sometimes is because the wounding is very deep in both parties. And it's like, you know, imagine it's like two inner wounded children just roaring at each other. So essentially, it's like, it might seem more, in some situations, more intense, but this shows that maybe the wounding needs a lot more attention that has caused that. So I would say personally that I think every argument has something to show us, in a way we can see it, that, you know, we can grow from it. But also, if, you know, obviously, if it's something that becomes too much, we can remove ourselves from the situation and then again reflect upon it. I think the reflection part is useful for anything like that happens.
It is, but at some point you've got to stop reflecting and deal with the issue.
Yeah.
I have some clients at the moment who have got the same sort of thing, and they're not really arguing. They are both sulking with each other, and they're not talking. And this goes on. They both want to be the one that the other person comes to first, and no one wants to be the first one to sort of be the one that goes to them, which is completely wrong. And I'm teaching them you have to be strong, be the first one to go for that. So how do you handle conflict without things escalating too much? Is there a way of doing it effectively?
So, I mean, I think there are definitely stages, and we can approach it from different angles depending on where we're at. But I would say the first thing is to understand this, this aspect of an argument, that it is essentially a reflection of how we might have suppressed certain parts of ourselves. So it's a great mirror that we can use to understand. Like, for example, I had this argument, let's say, with someone, and I felt very hurt. Then that has to show me that which part of me feels hurt inside, in the sense that I'm carrying from my past a hurt that is projecting through the other, and how can I be the one to tend to this part first myself, so that I understand what is going on. Then we can, if we in the beginning, it might not be easy during the argument to bring this, because we might be overwhelmed by the emotion, and that's totally normal. We can do this upon reflection and see, what was triggered there, and how is this emotion. I think naming the emotions of what was triggered during the argument is very helpful, because then we can use this understanding to see, where is this emotion familiar in my life from previous times, to notice the pattern, what is being recreated, basically. Because this takes away because basically what we do when we argue is we immediately often try to accuse the other. It's because it's your fault, it's because of what you said and what you did. And then when we bring it back to ourselves and say, okay, regardless what the other person did, how did we feel, brings it to us, and we take more responsibility for ourselves rather than accusing the other and putting the responsibility to an external party to make us feel good, while we can have a lot of responsibility for ourselves. And I find this very empowering. And also, if let's say that during the argument we realize that, okay, wait, we're having an argument right now, what can this mean? about me, for example, instead of using statements such as, you are this, you did that, we can use something called I message. So it's like, I feel hurt by this situation, or I feel not understood, or I feel angry because this made me feel or think that blah, blah, blah. This again shifts the perspective to how we feel. It helps us understand how we feel. It helps the other person understand how we feel, because we remove the accusation. So when you remove this you, the other person has more space to listen to you. While if you accuse them, they shut down.
But that's human nature, isn't it? If someone accuses you, you're going to be defensive.
Yeah, it's normal.
That's an interesting technique. So you would say something like, I'm feeling that no one's listening to me right now.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, you never listen to me.
Exactly. So that immediately gives the opportunity to the other person to be like, okay, they feel they're not heard, rather than, it's always my fault and you accuse me and all of these. Then it gets to this never-ending kind of accusation.
It does. I think what's quite useful in that situation is if you give that person the opportunity just to speak for 5 minutes, whatever it takes, to get all the words out, and then you can repeat back to them what they've said, saying the same things in the same way, so they feel that they've been heard and you understood.
Yeah.
Is that something that you teach people as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, this is very helpful, and it gives the space, like, for the person to be heard, the other person to listen, and then to do it vice versa for the other one. Because if, again, it comes down to this principle that if we see an argument as not something that, we are against each other and we are in this fighting kind of energy, but in the sense like, okay, clearly both people have something that is have a need that is not being met, have a wound that is being triggered. So how can we see what is creating this argument? If, you speak, tell me how you feel, using an I message preferably, then instead of getting into, again, explaining defensive mode, then I can share how I feel. And then this just gives a lot more opportunities to, I think, to zoom out, see it for what it really is, rather than for what the stories that we say to ourselves about what this is.
That's really useful. But how do you agree to have this conversation in the first place? Having an argument often stems from frustration. It happens in spur of the moment. But I think it's better to maybe plan the conversation in advance and to know you're going to be discussing it. What do you do if you've got something really hard that you want to bring up? When's the right time for that?
Well, I'm not sure if there is like a right time. I guess it's when it just feels right to do so, really. I mean, for some, again, it depends on the person. Like, some people like to plan in advance the conversation, say like, okay, I really need to talk to you about this later on. That might work. Or if, sometimes the spur of the moment can be great for bringing this up. But if someone feels, the emotion is too overwhelming, they can just take some space, be with it, and like away from the other person, make this kind of inner process that we talked about before, like see how they feel and what is brought up for them, and then communicate that later on to the person. So it depends on the situation, how it is. And
what if that really scares you and you're worried this is going to make things worse and you're going to have a massive argument, but you've got to say it?
Yeah, I think when we are afraid to bring something up, and when we are afraid of the conflict, this again is usually, it stems from someone's subconscious pattern that they have learned in the past. When, again, usually when growing up, for example, that someone might have grown up in a house that where conflict was seen as something negative, or there were a lot of moments where people were not talking about how they feel, and if anything, they were shamed for how they felt. So in general, like, maybe someone was not encouraged to speak about how they feel, so they have this pattern in programming that, okay, if I share how I feel, that's not good, it's something negative, because they have made that connection in their minds. So usually this is when we are afraid of the conflict, or we might be afraid that when someone, you know, argues, that, let's say, if someone's parents got divorced because they were arguing a lot, right? So they might have, the person might have this connection that, oh, these arguments led to my parents breaking up, and that was very bad for me. So arguing altogether is something negative. So it has to do with what connections we have made around this. When, again, we made these stories probably when we were very little, and this was the only explanation we gave, while reality is, you know, more complex, and we can give different, more empowering explanations now that we are adults, so we can handle more, you know, maturely those conflicts. We don't have to repeat, you know, what we saw in the past. We can change all of these reactions we have to these subjects.
Very much so. We're not shaped by our past. The future is ours to do what we want with it. But sometimes people are stuck in relationships where they're arguing every single day, and they're scared of the partner. They're scared they're going to upset them by saying the slightest thing. This goes on for a long period of time. What are the signs when, do you know what, it's time to throw in the towel and just separate?
Well, again, I think, you know, that would depend on a lot of factors, depending on the situation and the people. But I have seen that it's probably best to get to that, you know, decision when you have really tried, you know, what you think is your best. You have taken responsibility for your side. And then if you see the other side is completely, you know, not cooperating, and they don't want to see it that way, and they just still want to, you know, throw it at you, I mean, there's, you know, usually not much else to do.
I agree. I think in that situation, if you're in the sort of trying to work things out mode, it can be really useful to get a coach like you to come along and to intervene and to work with both of them individually, perhaps. Do you work with singles, or do you work with couples mostly
If it
in this
has,
situation?
yeah, as you said
Yeah,
initially, it's like
yeah,
in these situations I would work with the people separately, because
yeah,
we would see them as, you know, what is each one bringing to the table. And we will see, you know,
yeah,
most of the times when you do this work, you see it has nothing to do with your partner.
yeah.
It has your partner is just the, you know, this mirror, that it's just through them you get
Mm,
to see yourself more. So
yeah.
when you make these realizations, you see, like, it has very little to do with the partner, and a lot to do with, you know, what um, patterns of ours are being played out, and what
Yeah.
from the other side it happens the same, right? But you can only be responsible for your side. So
It's true. People often have stresses in life that are interfering with them, and they use that as an excuse to take it out on somebody,
yeah,
which is not healthy. But that's when maybe the partners just say, "Well, I'll listen to what you have to say, and we can try and resolve this." Whether it's a work issue, maybe they are working too many hours, or hate their job, or they feel unfit, and the partner can work with them to support them. That's what we are. We're a team ultimately, aren't we, to do this? And I think most people, they want to be together. They'll find a way through it
yeah.
overall. Now, a few things to talk about that are sort of separate to this as well. I want to talk about, if do you have any sort of daily rituals that you do as a coach? I'm asking all my guests this about daily ritual because it fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I used to have a lot of rituals that now I feel like I've given up in a way. I didn't sustain them.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, which rituals I always try to bring back to my daily routine, because I have found them to be extremely helpful. And I might not be doing this every day, but I really aim to do this as much as I can. It's something I learned from this book called The Artist's Way. It's basically a book that is, it has every week, it gives you different tasks that help you reconnect with your creativity.
Okay.
It's a very, very very interesting and exciting book. So anyway, in this book it says, if you every day, every morning that you wake up, before you do anything else, you write 3 pages of a notebook of free flow of anything, like anything. It can be, I don't know, I woke up and I'm hungry, or I woke up and I'm worrying for this meeting I have later on, or whatever it is,
Hmm.
whatever is in your mind, you dump all of your thoughts in these 3 pages, and then you create a lot more space to go about your day without having them floating around in your head.
Yeah.
And what happens that I've noticed is that you, like when you write, even if, let's say, sometimes you're like, I really don't know what to write. Even if you write, I really don't know what to write, something will come after that. So it's like, after you do this a little bit, your hand just like writes stuff. And so many times I would write something that I'm worrying about, or something that I'm just thinking a lot about. And as I'm writing it, I can see the solution just by writing about it, that I wouldn't have thought in my mind. Because you know how it's the same when you work with a coach. What is very helpful is that you have a person to reflect back to you what you think, what they pick up from you. So it's the same or similar thing when you write. Is like you notice what you write, and then you have this conversation with yourself. Sometimes gives you answers.
I did a whole podcast on this a while ago, I think last
Yeah.
year. A lady called St. Rappaport, I think her name was. And it was about how to do what you've just said, but using your non-dominant hand. So if you use the hand you don't normally write with, well, your subconscious mind will tell you all the answers and write things down.
Yeah.
And I still haven't tried that yet. I'm going to try it. Everyone mentions certain techniques. I need to just give them a go. But that book sounds interesting, The Artist's Way.
Yeah.
And we'll try and mention that in the notes. I'm going to start doing that now on my podcast notes. Mention any books or references and start doing that. But that sounds really, really useful. I think, do you find that helps you then to unleash and to get answers?
Yeah, so many times. And I notice the resistance sometimes, that you wake up and you might think, I just want to have my coffee, and then I'm like, I don't want to write anything. And then I notice this resistance, and it's like every time that I'm writing, I never regret it. If anything, I'm like, why didn't I do it? But it's sometimes it happens. Like, it's funny to observe this resistance. It's just there many times, and it's okay. It's normal. But it's like when you do it, it's like, okay, I can see every time how useful it is. So it really helps me put some things into perspective, and um, to just take them out of my system. Because then if I notice that the days that I don't do this, my mind might be more might feel more cluttered with stuff. So
Right. I've had a bit of an epiphany, actually, rather
yeah.
bizarrely. People often mention to me about journaling on this podcast. I mention almost every episode at some point. Someone goes, I do journaling, do meditation, do journaling. I struggle with journaling. I can never get around to doing it. And I've just realised, based on what you've just told me, the reason why I struggle with it. So I'm going to pause for anyone that's listening to me. We'll find the reason out, finally, why I find it so hard. It's because I don't really write anything down nowadays. I'm so conditioned, and most people are, I think, to typing away or playing on our phones and typing rather than handwriting. And I struggle. If I have to write a Christmas card or a shopping list, it's difficult to do that. So we're not conditioned in the same way to write things out. I think I'm out of the habit. My handwriting is an absolute scrawl. It's become worse. Maybe most adults have got really terrible handwriting. If they're not writing, we almost forget. I think what you just said, if I got into the habit of maybe just writing things down again, it becomes painful holding a pen after a while.
Yeah.
But if you get used to it, you'll remember how to do it and maybe get back in the flow. So that's obviously the reason why I can't do it. So finally, after 100 and almost 20 podcasts, I've finally realised why I don't do it. And
Yeah.
maybe I can type it up instead. Do it.
You can, or you can, you can just write that, like take a pen and say, I just feel uncomfortable writing. This is also
Yeah,
taking it out. It's
it's
so like
true.
helpful.
Maybe if it's all the subconscious mind, I can just write some scrawl and it will become words. And that's what the
Yeah.
whole that podcast is about. And maybe it doesn't need to be have best handwriting. I can pick out the words, almost like psychic writing to some degree, which is interesting. That brings me on to something else. It's still unrelated to this, but I want to ask you lots of questions before we do finish off. I know that one of the things that you coach is about human design and
Mm.
astrology. So human design, that I'm not really sure what that is in this sense, and how do you use astrology to help your coaching? Because that's something else I've covered recently, and it fascinates me.
Yes, I mean, I do use mostly human design. I just add a little bit of astrology bits here
Okay.
and there where I see fit. But so what human design is a system that, in a way, it gives you the energetics of your soul, like of who you came here to be.
Yeah.
And what it helps with is to, in a way, reconfirm to you what you already knew intuitively about yourself. And that's why I feel it's very empowering in that sense, because like people hear about their human design and they're like, wow, it's like I always knew about this, but I couldn't prove it or uh, point it out specifically. So it's in a way it helps you see what you are here to bring to the world. Like you can see what the energetic channels you have in your design, and it's like themes basically that you have prominent within you and you're like bringing out. And you can also see the areas of life that you are more receptive to the energy around you. So it's different for everyone. So it's in a way, so it helps someone to reconnect with their innate kind of free flow that they have within them.
Is this more a spiritual thing or a facts-based thing?
Well, I guess it is more of a spiritual thing. But when I found out about it at first, because I found it within myself. Like, when I bumped upon it and I read about my design, I was like, oh my God, never anyone has, described me so spot on. So then what I did, because I am a person who always likes to check and test things out before I pass them on. I swear to you, I think I did every person that I know in the world. I did their human design, and I was like just fascinated by thinking like, oh wow, yeah. And then thinking, I am a person in general who really observes people and how they react and how they are. So then looking at their human designs, I was like, wow, it's exactly what they they seem to be portraying out, that to bring out as their energy. And it confirmed to me so many things about even others, that it just helps you also more accept some things that you're like, yeah, actually they have this energy, and then this and this is why they do this, and I'm different, and that's fine, because everyone is here to be different. And it's just very fascinating.
This sounds very beneficial to people that are making bad choices in partners. If they did some work on this, they'd be able to know more about themselves, what they should be looking for in a partner.
Definitely, it is very helpful in understanding your partner, and just accepting some facts that just let them be who they are. You are who you are, and it does have this aspect of more acceptance and more understanding.
We're going to have to do this again, talk about this in more detail another time. That fascinates me.
It's very vast.
I'll do some research on it first and see exactly what it is, and I have more things to ask you. But that sounds fascinating. Maybe that could be a YouTube one for us that we're going to do. That would be really cool. Wonderful. So many wonderful snippets of information there and some great topics. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. If someone wants to find out more about you and what you do, how do they do that?
They can find me on Instagram or on my website.
Okay, and can you give the link so everyone knows what that is?
Yes, it would be the Instagram is Evnia Coaching, and the website is evniacoaching.com. So they can find.
What does that mean? What does Evnia mean?
Yes, Evnia. So I am from Greece, and I wanted to use a Greek word for my coaching practice, and Evnia means. In a way, it means beautiful thinking. It means it's like, it's hard to even explain in English. It's like
it's a lovely word.
It is quite like the enrichment maybe of someone when they are what's the word I want to use? But when they are benefited by life's force, pleasures. Maybe something like this.
Could you imagine if it meant potato or something like that? It just wouldn't really work, would it? You've made the word up. But that sounds completely relevant, and I love that. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Stefi. It's been wonderful talking to you again on the podcast.
Thank you, James.
I will let you go. It's a busy day for you, I'm sure. And it's very, very hot. So wonderful to speak to you, and I know we'll speak again. Bye for now.
Bye, James.
Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to give you a free copy of my latest book, which you can download right now from my website, jamespreece.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the love by taking a few seconds to write a positive review on the iTunes store right now. See you next time.